God come with power. So what does that mean? They were gonna see it, and it was coming soon. It was one of those prophecies that's like very quickly, right? It's coming right in the next verses here, which is the transfiguration. There be some of them that stand here. We know from the next verses, it's Peter, James, and John, who shall not taste of death till they have seen the kingdom of God come with power. So we're going to go over to 9 and 2. And if somebody would read 9, 2 through 10. Please. So there's a lot of information in 10 verses. We could have more than one sermon, those 10 verses, without any trouble at all. And so we go back and take a look. So Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John. And so they go into a high mountain, just themselves. And then you see he was transfigured before them. His raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller on earth can white them. So what is a fuller? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of your clothes. And what they're saying here, what Mark is saying, is it was whiter than anyone that they had ever met could do. And there appeared unto them Elias and Moses that were talking with Jesus. So they were recognizable as who they were. It doesn't really say how they were recognizable, but they were. Peter answered, and this is, I kind of think of Peter as the one that says what people are thinking. Everybody's thinking something, but Peter is more likely going to be one that's going to say something in each situation. It wasn't too many verses back that he said in 8 and 32 we just read, Peter took him and began to rebuke him. So that's when Jesus was talking about being killed and rising again after the third day. And here's Peter again, in this case, saying to Jesus, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee and one for Moses and one for Elias. So he really didn't know what to say, but he was nervous, wanted to say something, and it was just a situation I think they never imagined that they would be in, and they were unprepared for how to handle it. And it says in verse 6, for he didn't know what to say, he wist not what to say, for they were sore afraid. All of them were afraid. And then in verse 7, and there was a cloud that overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved Son, hear him. So this is the second time that God is speaking. The first time was at his baptism with John the Baptist. Now we're seeing again, God is saying, this is my beloved Son, in this case, hear him, distinguishing him from the other two that were there, Moses and Elias. And so this is pretty remarkable, this whole thing that just happened. I mean, it's only, we just read 7 verses. So it's 7 verses out of the Bible, but it's such a huge thing in terms of the importance of it. So why did Jesus do this? Why did he take Peter, James, and John up this mountain and then allow them to see him more as he is? Why did that happen? Mm-hmm. So they were witnesses to what happened, and it wasn't one witness. It wasn't just Peter. It wasn't two. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In a chariot. Mm-hmm. And they were there in bodily form, but they were they were recognizable in their bodily form, but they also looked different as well. Uh-huh. Out in the desert, out in the mountains. Yeah. Right. Mm-mm. Right. Yeah, there isn't. It just he was changed or transfigured, and you look at metamorphosis, which Brother Jim's talked about a few times before, as far as the origin of all that. But if you think about a caterpillar and a butterfly, that's a metamorphosis, right? You start with something that doesn't look like anything like it's going to end up turning into, and then it does. And so I have to believe that this was no difference in terms of a stark difference to Peter, James, and John when they got to see Jesus appear this way. It was obvious to them that he was the Son of God. It wasn't a mystery or something. They were seeing firsthand themselves, not on faith, that Jesus was showing it to them, see for themselves, and later share it with others that what they had seen of Jesus' transfiguration, and even the foreshadowing of it from 9 and 1, which is just one verse ahead of time. So this was all connecting the dots. right? They were getting a glimpse of the future that nobody else was going to get. And so, if you look at Matthew 17, 1 through 8, I think it gives another account. Somebody like to read that? So that's another account of the same thing. In verse 2, he is transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was as white as light. And so, God appearing to us as light is not anything new from what we see in the Bible. There's lots of examples of it. We can look at a few of those. If you look in Leviticus 9 and 23, and Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people. And in verse 24, and there came a fire out from before the Lord, and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. That's one example. Another example in Exodus 24, 15 through 18. It's Exodus 24, 15 through 18. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and gat him upon the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So there's other examples, there's lots of other examples that I could go to, but God appearing to his disciples as light is nothing unusual. The fact that Jesus is appearing this way, he had not appeared this way so far in anything we had studied in Mark. And so this transfiguration was really an opportunity for Peter, James, and John to witness Jesus the way he would appear later once he had been resurrected. And this opportunity was really for the purposes of strengthening their faith, so that when the trials and things that came up that they had struggle dealing with, that they would know that Jesus was the Son of God, this was God's plan, and that everything had to play out just the way Jesus was describing and the way the prophets had described it as well. And so we get in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought up that example. Is that prayer was the trigger that caused the change. And so just like prayer was the trigger that caused the change in this case for Jesus, We're going to see that again later in our lesson. It's going to come up again in another spot. Okay. We got through the first page. Okay. So just like the rest of the Jewish people, it was really incomprehensible to the disciples, even the apostles, that the Messiah would be, the Son of God would be murdered. They didn't believe anything like this for the Messiah. They thought the Messiah was going to come, was going to be a ruler, was going to vanquish all of God's enemies, was going to create a kingdom that included Israel, and all the enemies would be judged, and he would establish an earthly kingdom. So the only problem with all of that is they thought all that was going to happen during their lifetimes when Jesus was here on earth. And so Jesus was describing to them a plan that was different than what they expected, and it was even different than what the scribes were teaching back in that day as well. They were teaching that more or less another person, I guess they thought probably similar to David, was going to come and take them out from underneath the Roman rule and all those other things, and it would happen that Israel and God's people would all be united and their enemies would be vanquished. But that was clearly not what was going to happen. Not in their lifetime. Yes, thanks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't see what had to happen next first. So Jesus kept pointing it out to them multiple different times, and they were just not understanding is what was happening. And so I think sometimes that happens to us too. We hear things or we see things, and maybe the first time we see it, we don't understand it. We're like, okay, I read the words, I see what it says, but I don't really understand exactly what it means. In the context of the Bible, but you continue to study, and then also just having life experiences. Life experiences teaches you some parts of things too, different perspectives and things. But if you keep working on it, and you pray about it and ask for the Holy Spirit's help, I really do believe that the words in the Bible will be revealed. Not necessarily every single thing. If you come for Revelation study, you'll see that there's still some things that have not been shared with us yet. But that's how we understand is by studying and praying. If you go to, let's see, I didn't really think about this the first time I read it, but the witnesses were Peter, James, and John, but the witness was also God. God was there too. And so there were 4 witnesses, and the fact that God was there was probably the best witness of all, because the apostles definitely got the message. If they didn't get the message already from everything else that had happened, I think God put the punctuation mark on it to make sure there was no shadow of a doubt that he was the Son of God, and that everything that they saw and experienced was truly an experience, not a dream, that it was real as anything can be. And if you see later, let's see, it's in verse, okay, in verse 9, and as they came down from the mountain, each man what things they had seen, till the Son of Man was risen from the dead. So he was asking them to keep it to themselves until after the resurrection. So it wasn't, don't talk about it at all, ever. It was wait until the resurrection to help explain it to everybody when you're teaching to everybody what's happened. So, and they did keep that saying with themselves, questioning with one another what the rising from the dead should mean. And the confusion there could have been they saw Jesus raise people from the dead. Jairus' daughter was one. There were some others. But that was Jesus doing it. So if Jesus is going to rise from the dead, then who's going to do it in that situation. So they were confused, right? They were like, we don't really think we understand what you're telling us. You brought this up a few times and we still don't understand what you mean. And then they ask him, saying, why say the scribes that Elias must first come? The scribes quoting prophecy from the Old Testament. And the answer told them, Elias verily come first, and restoreth all things, and how it is written of the Son of Man, that he must suffer many things, and that not. But I say unto you that Elias is indeed come, and they have done unto him whatsoever they listed, as it is written of him. So who do we know that was a prophet that we saw recently that reminded us a lot of Elijah? John the Baptist, absolutely. John the Baptist was known by everybody. John the Baptist, even though he taught in the desert, he did not prophesy of himself. He prophesied of the one that was to come, the one that was going to be the Messiah. And sorry? They did. They did. For lots of different reasons, apparently. I guess one is foreshadowing what would happen to Jesus and the other apostles, but also so the attention was on Jesus, I think. I believe that was another one of the reasons, but mm-hmm, they were right. Even though everything he said was the truth and consistent with what they had already studied and read. And so mm-hmm, right. Yep, he spoke of that. So okay, if we keep going, when they come down from the mountain, they see a situation that's unfolding there in front of them. Let's see. If someone wouldn't mind reading 14 through 29. Thank you so much. That was a lot of verses. So this is another example, and sometimes I wonder when I'm studying, why was this specific example pulled out of all the things that happened, which could be hundreds or thousands of times? Why was this specific one shown, knowing that we would study it and learn something from it? What made it representative or an important part of the studies for us to know? And so here we are. We're coming down from the mountain. This is Jesus, Peter, James, and John coming down to the disciples, and they saw a multitude in verse 14, and the scribes were questioning with them. And so here we go back to the debate of the scribes, saying, okay, what's going on? We see what's happening here. You're trying to remove a demon from this person, and you're not successful. So obviously they were saying things. This just points to the fact that you're not worshiping the true God, or whatever else. You can imagine what they were saying, but they were definitely on the side of saying that they were not the ones that knew God's will and God's teachings, and they were not following it. And so when Jesus asked the scribes, what question ye with them, the scribes didn't answer. If you notice that in verse 17, the scribes didn't answer. Even Jesus' disciples also didn't answer. It was one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And then he got into the details of it and said later in verse 18, And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. So you can imagine Jesus' frustration here, because he had empowered the apostles with the ability to do things, and we can go back and find the verse, but that was from a couple of chapters ago, where he had empowered them to do things. And so he answered the question here and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me. So that statement that he was making, who do you think he was making that statement to? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I was wondering about it myself, and then when I looked in verse 29, when they had asked, the disciples had asked him privately, why could we not cast him out? And he said, this kind can come forth by nothing but prayer and fasting. So I'm wondering, had the apostles not prayed at the time that this happened? You see that in other places in the Bible where Hebrews didn't pray and they weren't successful because they didn't go to God first. So it doesn't say. It's possible that that's what it was, but here Jesus gave a pretty definitive answer. First by saying, "O faithless generation," so you have to have strong faith, and then secondly, prayer and fasting. So he said that was the only reason why that they had everything else that they needed. So that was the implication that I kind of read into it. And so he went through the whole thing here. And as you mentioned, Brother Mike, when we get to the Father, in verse 23, Jesus says unto him, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. So he said that he believed, but he didn't know if he believed everything or believed enough. I, mhm, mhm, mhm. Mhm. It does. It really does. And we can believe lots of things, but not believe everything or not believe as strongly as we should. Mhm. 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 It- yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Right. It makes me wonder too. With Jesus there, did the apostles and disciples did they think, well, well, he's empowered us, but Jesus is here, and he's going to be right back. So maybe we should wait until he comes back from up on the mountain, and we can get this sorted out. And so maybe they looked at that and said, well, let's just wait. But that's not what the Lord wants us to do. The Lord wants us to just keep going, have the faith, and we're empowered as a Christian to witness to others and to talk to others. Right, right, yeah. Hmm. And we should pray that the Lord's will be done, which is not necessarily ours, right? And so when we pray that, we have to be prepared for what happens or doesn't happen, and then continue to pray that, okay, well, that didn't really happen the way I would like, so now what do I do or where do I go? And that we just have to pray the Lord helps us to see the right path, whatever it is, his job or whatever it might be. Um, I always pray the same thing: open the right door and close all the wrong ones. And I'm too dumb to know the difference, so please just lead me through it and help me get through it. So, okay, so that's through 29. Now we go to 30, 31, 32. And they departed thence and passed through Galilee and he would not that any man should know it. So if you remember before, there were the multitudes, and they all basically thronged around him. I'm thinking of Bush Stadium again, where people throng around everybody. He did not want that same situation. So it says here, he would not that any man should know it. So they went through Galilee, not for the purpose of his ministry of teaching to the multitudes or healing, but to pass through, and also as an opportunity to teach the disciples that were with him. In verse 31, for he taught his disciples and said unto them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. And here again, in verse 32, but they understood not that saying, and were afraid to ask him, because he had said it many times already before. And they didn't understand those times, and they didn't understand this time. And this was even after the transfiguration, so they're still struggling with trying to understand all of that meaning for the reasons we talked about earlier. And then in 33, which to me this kind of seems random, like how people's minds wander. And so here they're walking, obviously, with Jesus, and in this case they were coming to Capernaum, and he asked, what was it that you disputed amongst yourselves by the way? So they were having an argument. It might have been a friendly argument, but they were still having an argument. But they didn't say. They held their peace. For by the way, they had disputed amongst themselves who would be the greatest. And so here they are. It's sinking into them. Okay, God shows us we're the 12 apostles. He gave us some powers here to teach and to heal and other things, and had us go out and do some missionary work, teaching to people. But which one of us is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God? So you kind of think of that. They were looking at each of themselves, and they were keeping score. Well, how many did you witness to, and how many do you think were converted over to be saved? And okay, you got 10, I got 12, whatever. They were doing the racking and stacking sort of a thing, probably. It doesn't say here exactly how they did it. But they were looking at themselves on who would be deserving of the best recognition and rewards. So I can imagine they'd say, okay, you're first, I'm second, you're third, you're fourth, here's why, all that sort of stuff. But they didn't want to talk to Jesus about it, because I think they already knew Jesus was not going to be happy with having this kind of a conversation. And so he gets to it pretty quickly in verse 35. And he sat down and called the 12, and saith unto them, so he made sure he had every single one of their attention, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all, and servant of all. And so, what does that really mean? How does that compare to the religious leaders of the day? Right, they were focused on themselves. They wore the flashy robes, all those sorts of things. They drew attention to themselves. They made sure that when they prayed, they did it in a very public way, and lots, potentially even theatrics to go with it and all that. And that was exactly the opposite of what Jesus was looking for. And if you look at these words, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and servant of all. And so he's calling on them to be servants, which is the exact opposite. If you think of anybody that's a ruler or has a title or anything of any importance, whether it's a job title, whatever it is, being a servant is like the exact opposite what you think of that person would have on their mind. And yeah, exactly. They're focused on themselves and what are they going to get out of all this, versus what the Lord wants them to do is when He's gone, to keep teaching, right? we didn't get to it, the Great Commission, but not yet, but that's what he wants them to do. And if you're going to do all that kind of work, you're not going to be sitting there, look at all the things I've accomplished, look how great everything is. You're not going to do the kind of service it takes to go out and teach and travel and all the things that Jesus suffered that they also suffered, all the criticism and if you look at, there's some verses in Paul that he describes all the things he went through. And your reward's not going to be here. You got to get the opposite. For here, you're going to get the exact opposite. You're not going to get any stature, title, anything else. Whatever you do get will be determined by the Lord, and it's based on how much you are actually a servant. And so in verse 36, and he took a child and set him in the midst of them. When they had taken him into his arms, he said unto them, Whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me, and whosoever shall receive me receiveth not me, but him that sent me. And Jesus answered him, saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followed not us. And we forbade him, because he followed not us. But Jesus said, Forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me. For he that is not against us is on our part. For whosoever shall give you a cup of water to drink in my name, because ye belong to Christ, verily I say unto you, he shall not lose his reward. So I think he was preparing them also that there's going to be many people that are saved. Who knows how many people were saved in those times. And all those people were going out and witnessing to what they had seen to others, which is potentially leading to them being saved also. So salvation didn't necessarily have to come directly from these apostles themselves, from all the work that Jesus had done here in his earthly ministry. And then the last verses here, we got 10:39. Okay, so here he's saying in verse 42, speaking of the children there, Whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were cast into the sea. Well, that's pretty bad. If that happened to you, that'd be pretty bad. You could definitely drown and die. And so the Lord is warning whomever would be in a situation where the children were seeking Jesus and they more or less put him on something else or told him to stop talking about it or whatever it was putting up obstacles and barriers for them to accept Jesus as their Savior. He describes the punishment that would happen there. And then he talks about several other things here, which if you see something that, whether it's your foot or your eyes or whatever, is causing you to sin, and get rid of it. So he's basically saying you need to rid yourself of sin, whatever way you can. And in verse 49, For everyone shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost its saltness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves, and have peace one with another. That message, that very last piece, obviously a very strong message of having peace with each other. Christ's followers were to count on the Lord and to influence the world in a positive way. Right. Yeah. Definitely not. Yeah. Those things that get in our way. Right. Absolutely. Okay, well that's the end of this chapter. always seem like we kind of leave things hanging. But we got another chapter coming up in verse 10, and because of the brevity of what Mark does, he gets through things really fast. We've already gone through 10 chapters, and we only have, or we went through 9, and we have 7 left. So we're already more than halfway through, and the things that are coming up are definitely going to be some of the things that we're going to show Jesus being brought before the Gentiles, just like he said. He's going to be ridiculed. He's going to be ridiculed by the religious leaders, by the Roman leaders and the other leaders that are there. He's going to be humiliated. He's going to be put on the cross. All that's coming up. So stand by for more.